That was one of my mantras. The truth will set you free. But today, I would tell you that the truth would get you into trouble. I am not saying that you should not pursue the truth. No, I'm not saying that. But don't have the illusion.
What if you turn hardship into grace, anger into serenity? Everything changes. Make your life a masterpiece. Welcome, I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Janarius Jingwa. Janarius Jingwa is the author of The Splendor of Truth and Beyond Doctrine. The Splendor of Truth was published in 2025 by Whip and Stock Publishers. An incredible book, and actually we will talk about this book the next time, because this time we will really talk about lifelong learning. What makes someone become a lifelong learner? Why people ought to be and become lifelong learners, and actually how to become a lifelong learner. And to really pursue this question, how to become a lifelong learner, I think Dr. Januarius Jingwa is a great example of being a lifelong learner. Welcome, Doctor, to the show. It's such an honor to have you.
Thank you. Yes, you asked the question, how do you become a lifelong learner? And I want to say that everybody is a lifelong learner. Everybody is, whether they realize it or not, because you keep on learning new things. They may be profound or or simple, but I think everybody, you have no choice but to learn. Beyond that, though, some people really, in a way, systematize it, like want to study really deep beyond just the day-to-day knowledge. I am one of those people who tries to do that. And just like you started by introducing my name, I go. My last name ought to have been Jingwa, but I use but Asongu as my last name for reasons that I could explain later, but which is still part of that whole idea of lifelong learning. But yeah, so for me, everybody, the world is really exciting. There is a lot to know about the world, and I cannot but just keep on trying to grasp as much as possible, cognizant of the fact that I will not be able to learn all what all what I could.
So, what do you think made you a lifelong, really a deliberate lifelong learner? Because you did so many studies from psychology to religion, and you did also a doctor, PhD, and so on and so forth, and you published already 2 incredible books. So, what do you think, just to lay a little bit the context of your life? So, what made you become a lifelong learner, a deliberate learner, really?
Yeah, first of all, as a kid, I really enjoyed reading. So I think, and my dad is a teacher. He's still alive, and he's a teacher. And I learned from him, or rather, this. Let me put it this way: when we grew up, the word hardworking did not mean that you could do physical labor or do some other thing. It just meant that you read a lot of books in our house. So when my dad said you were hardworking, it meant that you were always reading and that you scored high grades in your exams, like hitting the A's and all that. And when he said you were lazy, it had nothing to do with actual work. It meant that you were not performing that well or meeting his expectations in school. So coming from that background, uh, uh, I wanted, and I was my dad's first son, first child too, and I wanted to impress him, and so I wanted to study, and I just started reading. But the more I read, I realized that I had more questions, and so that just pushed me to keep on reading and reading and reading. Um, but how did my path go this way? First of all, uh, uh, when I was a teenager, I read Chinwe Achebe, Things Fall Apart. At that point, I thought it was the best book ever written. And I was really moved by it. And I told myself I wanted to become an author. That is like at the age of 12, 13. I decided that I wanted to be an author in the mold of Chinua Achebe. I think I've disappointed myself because I haven't done that. I didn't go that direction. But continuing from there, I started trying to see how I could impact my environment. And as a young man, I was acquainted with poverty, not personal poverty. Actually, we grew up, as I said, from a higher uh, or upper middle class family. We were about the best people in our neighborhood or even our city in terms of financial well-being. But I was touched by the way my neighbors lived, other people lived, and I saw poverty around me. And also my dad had was a very strict guy, made us to go to church, brought us up as strong Catholics, made us go to church, but also uh, uh, made us to lead exemplary lives. You had no choice but to be good. So I was also touched by the fact, even when I went to middle high school, with by the fact that there were some of my friends, some of my classmates who did not care about ethics, who did not care about morality and all of that. So I was like, what type of people are these? And so I initially thought that I could become a priest, a Catholic priest, so as to preach to all these people, convince them that they have to live ethical lives and to lead religious lives and all that. And so I ended up going to the seminary to study for the Catholic priesthood. Uh, but while there, I was disappointed, partly because, as I said, I grew up in a very strict moral environment, and I was surprised that the seminary was not as strict as I thought it could be, and that there were people, priests, and even seminarians who were not living lives worthy of their calling. So that was a shock to me, and I started um, telling myself that before we preach to the world, before we go out to convince the world, to convert the world, we must first convert ourselves. So I started becoming very critical of the church, even as I wanted to become a priest. And so I became unpopular and ultimately decided to quit, to leave. But I remain a committed Christian and all that. But what does this have to do with lifelong learning? What it has to do is that uh, uh, given that experience in the seminary is a very, most Catholic seminaries, I think all, are very deep academic centers where you are taught philosophy, you are taught theology, you are taught linguistics, classical languages, and all of that. So one of the things that I had gotten from there, even though I left after I'd earned my philosophy degree, was that deep uh, sense of learning and exposure to classical learning, which just tied to what I was, because even by the time I got to the seminary, I'd already gotten a reputation as somebody who read a lot. So it wasn't like, it didn't change me, it just pushed me towards a certain direction. And ever since, uh, upon leaving the seminary, I asked myself, what do I make of myself? So initially, I wanted to become a reporter, a journalist. So I went and studied journalism in Nigeria, came back, practiced briefly in Cameroon, my home country, and got fellowships to, I think I did fairly well because I got fellowships to go to Cambridge University to study or do research on journalism. I got another scholarship or fellowship to come to the United States as part of what was then called the Alfred Friendly Press Fellowships. So, and in both cases, I was the first person from Cameroon to 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 get those achievements. I think I'm still the only person from Cameroon to have gotten that particular fellowship to Cambridge, and as of now, there's one other person who got the Alfred Friendly Press Fellowship to come to the U.S. So, in a sense, I feel excited and satisfied. But so I went into journalism to write. As I told you, I wanted to become a writer, and writing mainly because I wanted to share ideas and all that. So after I got into journalism, I really wanted to make it like my lifelong career. But soon, especially here in the United States, given that I grew up in Africa and I had the African accent, I realized that it was a little challenging for me to break into the mainstream media, especially broadcast, either radio or TV. So I did write for some newspapers, including the Houston Chronicle. I wrote for magazines and all that. But I was not satisfied with that. I I also so I decided to move into public relations, even though that did not require me studying anything new. But I moved into public relations, and I was working for a firm that specialized in telecommunications and IT stuff. And I hate to not sound like an expert on anything that I do. So I told myself I needed to study more about technology. So I went back to school and studied, did a master's in information technology, uh, in management of information technology. And then thereafter, I also went into teaching and all of those. And uh, and ended up doing a doctorate in business administration, and did another one in cybersecurity because when I was just as I was finishing the doctorate in business administration, I realized that cybersecurity was becoming a big deal, and I was really interested in understanding how that works. And so I plunged into that, did another doctorate in cybersecurity administration. And then over time, I've always been interested in psychology. I'd always been interested in psychology. And lots of my philosophical and theological training, as well as reading and exploration, I just felt that there was a missing link there, being psychology, that maybe if I studied that, it would make a difference. But what finally pushed me uh, towards that was the issue of the LGBTQ. Uh, uh, there was a lot of controversy in Africa They almost turn it into a myth. Some people say that it's witchcraft. By the way, I do not believe in witchcraft. But I mean, like you hear people saying like that, and people saying that it is that it is abnormal and it is I mean all the negative stuff. So I wasn't really comfortable with that. But I felt that in order to argue more or to understand the lives of LGBTQ individuals, that it was important that I study psychology to get a better grasp of their situation, and so I did. It was that specific question that drove me, that finally gave me license to go study psychology. And I went in. Fortunately, I found a school that was willing to allow me to do the doctorate without going back again to maybe undergraduate or even master's. So, given that I already had other doctorates, they more or less exempted me and allowed me to come into the program. And my research is on that, and especially I did research on how LGBTQ Christians are treated within conservative church circles and all that. Yeah.
That is amazing. So let's go a little bit back and really talk a little bit more about why do you think setting high standards, especially in terms of your father setting high standards on his children like you, was important?
Oh, I think it's extremely important because if you do not, uh, I mean, if you do not aim high, the tendency is that you will go for anything. So, growing up, my father had an extraordinary life, I would say. He grew up in Africa at a time when very few people went to school, and he went to school and studied up to the doctoral level, uh, being just not just the first person in his family to go to school. He got there and got to the very summit of education. So he always believed that education was important. And he used to tell us very clearly that if he could make it to that level, there was no excuse for us not to rise up to that and I embraced that. I embraced it. I just found it to be true. Like understanding how my father could make it to that level, I just felt like this was true, was my job or my responsibility to go. So I think that setting high standards for children, for your kids, is a good thing. It's a good thing. He enforced it quite much though, but I think beyond just trying to enforce it, for example, by the time I went to college, he could not force me to do anything any longer, but he had already trained me in such a way that I appreciated that and 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 I went for that. And the evidence, just to show you how successful he is that we are seven of us. Unfortunately, I have a sister who has been sick right from birth. So she's over 50 years old, but she's still sick. So she could not go very far in school given her health condition. But for the other six of us, five of us have PhDs, and the other person who as of now is the only person without a PhD will be graduating with a PhD in May. But by the way, he has two bachelor's degrees and two master's degrees already. So I mean, and his lack of a PhD it's almost nothing. But at some point, he told us, like, I don't want to be like the only person in this family without a PhD. So he went back to school to study for a doctorate. He's graduating this May. So that shows you how successful my dad was in transmitting that idea of learning to us, that all his children. I mean, some have PhDs, some have professional doctorates, like we have medical doctors and other professional doctors. Yes, but everybody in the family is a doctor of sorts.
What does learning do to you and to your soul?
Yeah, learning to me is the most exciting thing. It's so exciting that even growing up as a kid, I wasn't very playful. I wasn't like when my friends went out to play soccer, which was the main sports back in Cameroon. When they went out to play soccer, I rather picked a book and I read, and I interacted with the characters in the book, especially if it was a novel, and I would be living in a world of my own. Like I would be like I'm enjoying the life of like participating in the life of those people. Uh, Even though I don't think it's a great thing that I didn't do much sports, I probably regret it today because that would have made me maybe a healthier person. But beyond that, I think for me, uh, I can almost learning is very satisfying. It's like what Saint Augustine says that we are made for you, O Lord, and our heart are restless until the rest in you. So for me, there is nothing more exciting than getting new knowledge. There is nothing more pleasing than getting new knowledge. I would rather read a book or explore an idea than go for a party or whatever thing other people enjoy. But I think too that it does really help to ground me in all the things I do. For example, I would now say that I'm an advocate for the LGBTQ community, but it's thanks to my learning and that I'm able to make choices so that the choices I make, they're usually deliberate. But as you are going to see, or when we come to discuss my philosophy, it doesn't mean, even though I said my choices are deliberate, it doesn't mean that I do not change. No, because they are deliberate and because I keep on learning new things, my choices, my preferences keep on changing, but they're always changing based on new knowledge, based on facts, and not just emotion. I'm not very much an emotional guy. I'm more of a critical thinker. Yep. I think that's just how I was wired.
Let's define critical thinking, because that's also something sometimes which gets really confused, because critical thinking doesn't mean that you necessarily just reject everything. It has to
No.
do with dialectics, and I really want to know about you what you mean by critical thinking, but then also really go into what discipline shaped you most in terms of your evolvement, of your evolution in terms of your thinking? Because what you're saying is really, I think, the best example of a lifelong learner, which means
Yes.
really you incorporate ultimately, you incorporate knowledge. In other words, it becomes part of you, the way you see, acting, experience the world, right? And
Yes.
therefore it's exciting. That's why you're basically addicted to it in a
Yes.
healthy way,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
ultimately it's a self-reinforcing cycle, right? So
Yes.
let's first take apart what you mean by critical thinking, and then really tell us a little bit more about the most critical study. Maybe you know that there are not, but I'm just curious, and then really how you actually do it from day to day.
Yes. Yeah, so critical thinking uh, basically means uh, I am committed to what I call self correction. Committed to self correction. Uh, that is the way I really put my critical thinking. So when I get an idea, if hear an idea, or sometimes I develop the ideas myself. So the first thing that I do is that when I hear a new idea that I think is bright, or I develop it myself, I'm usually very excited about it. And when I become excited about it, and unfortunately my wife and children become my first lecture lecture targets. I call them and sit them down and try to explain this new uh, concept that that I have. And sometimes in the course of explaining it, I will realize that it's not as good as I thought it was initially. Or they will ask me a question and I'll be like, I didn't think about it like that. And basically, the way I look at critical thinking is simply a commitment to self-correction. A commitment to self-correction. That's you look at things and you look at it from different perspectives. That is what I mean, even though I'm talking about something slightly different, I've come to call that one synthesis, like synthetic thinking. So, but to me, the criticality and the synthetic approach are complementary. But critical thinking is that everything that I take, I do not just accept it for what people call gospel truth. And to me, the concept of gospel truth itself is very funny because I don't think the gospel. I mean, there may be a truth behind the gospels, but our understanding of it is so diverse. For example, there's a Catholic way of looking at things, there's a Protestant way of looking at things, there's all that. So there is so talking about the gospel truth to me is an oxymoron. Like how do you know what the gospels are saying? Well, there are different schools of thought. That's a whole different thing. But I'm just saying that so I don't take anything for the gospel truth, not even the gospel. Not even the gospel. I don't take anything as the gospel truth, not even the gospel itself. And so with that, I basically license myself to critique anything. And a critique again is not a negative term here. It's more like trying to understand. But I was really, and to talk about what influenced me the most is philosophy. It was philosophy. I was at the seminary we were taught Thomistic philosophy, also called scholastic philosophy, and we had our teacher, our professor, who was quite good at. He was quite a good Thomistic scholar. I'm using scholar in quote because I've never seen anything that he wrote apart from his thesis. And but so but he was good. He understood it and could explain it so well. Like if you start talking, he could stop you midway and tell you why your thinking was not Thomistic, and he will be right. He will be right. So he was that good at Thomistic philosophy. So I remember, and by the way, he later became a bishop. He later became a bishop. At that time, Father Emmanuel Bushu, very intelligent guy, but very, very humble guy. The most humble guy I've ever met. So he was a very humble guy. So he taught Thomistic philosophy, and it was just Thomistic metaphysics. So one day, I think I'm humble, but I'm cut differently than him. My own humility is different than his. So one day, he was explaining this thing so well, and I asked him, like, Father, have you ever thought about writing your own book? You understand this thing well. Have you thought about writing it and maybe improving it and making it better? And Father Bushu, then now Bishop Bushu, looked at me and told me that that uh, Thomas Aquinas wrote it all. He said it all. To him, he believed that Thomas Aquinas had, like he had resolved every philosophical issue, and I think he believed it deeply. And so his role was not to improve it or to do anything, but rather to understand it. I was disappointed by that answer, but still I respect him very much. In fact, I dedicate my book to him. To Bishop Bushu. So he understood, he thought his role was simply to understand Aquinas and then explain it to other people. For me, I thought differently. I was cut off. I was formed in a different mold. My initial instinct, even as I asked him, I couldn't figure out anything wrong with Thomism. But I just felt like, you know what? This guy wrote these things hundreds of years ago. There should be something better, or there should be something we can improve on this. And that's why I was asking him. But basically, so philosophy has influenced me a lot. Interestingly, he gave me a book, this priest, later bishop. I think it was in 92, one of the classes he had with us, he called me and asked me to meet him in his office. Sometimes students used to be scared when they were asked to go to the office, because he was not only the philosophy professor, he was the rector. That's like the president of the seminary. So it could mean that you are being fired or something really bad. But I was very confident of myself. I knew that I do the right things and all that. So I was not worried. I remember one of my classmates coming to me and asked me, "What did you do wrong? Why are they asking you to come to the office?" And I'm like, "I don't know, and I don't care. I will go there in the evening." And in the evening, I showed up in his office with a smile, and he picked a book that was written by another former seminarian, and this book was on Karl Popper. It was on Karl Popper. And he handed this former seminarian had written the book, sent 2 copies to him. So he asked me to take one and give to the school library, and then the other copy. Well, he didn't ask me to own it, even though I own it up to today. But he gave me 2 copies, asked me to take one to the library, and then the second he asked me to read it and come for us to discuss. So when I read this book about on Karl Popper, written by this other guy, his name is Tangwa from Cameroon. He did his doctorate on Karl Popper. That is when I was first introduced to Karl Popper's epistemology, where he is actually anti-Thomist because he talks about why Thomism claims that that the truth is objective and that we can have complete knowledge of that truth. Popper rather says that we cannot have complete knowledge about truth. For him, truth is tentative, and truth is, or our knowledge of the truth is guided by our own knowledge as individuals, our own capabilities as individuals, but also the overall knowledge that exists in society. So all of that helps us to understand. And he had this idea about falsification, where because he has a whole theory of science where basically whatever ideas you have to continuously try to falsify them, and the ones that resist falsification are the ones that you see as correct. So reading that, it was like different from what we were being taught, where we were told that truth can be known for certain, and that truth is unchangeable. The truth, it remains the same. So it was different. I don't even know why he gave it to me, apart from the fact that, as I told you, that I'd already gotten a reputation for reading. I think that's why he gave it to me. I don't know whether he even read it before So I took the book, and within a week, even though I was also studying, but it wasn't a large book. I think it was under 200 pages. It was actually a small book compared to the amount of work I could read. It took me like a week just because there were some new concepts. I was still like first or second. I was like a sophomore, or less. So there were some concepts that were new that slowed me down. That slowed down the pace of my reading. But in under a week, I finished reading that book, and I came back to him as he has said. He had asked that after I finish, I can come for us to discuss. what I did was I did a review of the book. I did not just come to discuss, I wrote a review of the book. So I came to him after one of our classes and presented a copy of my review, and I told him that I'm willing for us to talk. He read it and he told me that it was publishable material and that I should try to get it published, which I ultimately did. We then had that discussion in which he tried to explain to me why Popper was wrong in certain aspects. And to some extent, I didn't completely buy it. Uh, and up to today, Popper literally changed my life. Like, changed my life, like the way I look at philosophy. Yes, so it was providential, so to say. Yeah, so philosophy has really influenced me beyond every other thing. And so I keep on asking, and as in philosophy, we keep on asking the question like why, and to go down to the deepest causes and reasons for things. So that is what really moves me. And so as a Christian too, having studied some theology, even though I didn't do a theology, I didn't finish a theology degree, but having studied part of theology, in fact, as you rightly said, I've written Beyond Doctrine, a huge book, like 500 and something pages, which is a theological piece. I have some other theology works uh, that that are in the press. So yeah, so I do use my philosophy. It influences everything I do. Even as a professional right now, I work in the area of cybersecurity. And you may ask, like, what has cybersecurity got to do with philosophy? But sometimes I see how that that my desire to learn to get into the bottom of things, how that helps me in cybersecurity. But also, interestingly, cybersecurity has been helping me in other things. So, for example, like risk management, like I put that concept, I've applied it to my theology, I've applied it to to other things. So, as I said, uh, uh, basically, uh, I'm uh, I'm very I believe in critical thinking, and I believe in synthesis, which is different. When I started, I used to describe myself as eclectic, but today I am not eclectic because I think eclectic is not as deep as synthesis. Yeah, so I started from there though, just trying to understand things in different field and use the. But now I've come to the position where I can now not only do I try to master different fields, but I also now try to synthesize all that knowledge and see how they affect each other, how they interplay, and how they can help to make the world a better place for everybody.
I really appreciate what you said about critical thinking. Really, it's self-correction, really a commitment to self-correction, and that's
Correct.
also really what really Popper lays out in his philosophy of science, which is really
Yes.
the correction of errors, right? What you
Yes.
mentioned with falsifiability, and so I think it's so important, and I really like also the emphasis that you put on understanding, especially when it comes to your professor, your former professor, who is now a bishop, because
Yes.
I think this is actually the hardest part, is really to be able to understand someone else's work, because it's a very different process. It's one way or one thing of really developing a thesis, right? Because it's from your brain, you understand yourself, or it's a whole other thing to make yourself understood. And I think what he really meant was that Thomas Aquinas' work is so, I mean, I think he wrote I don't know, thousands of pages. I mean, it's
Yep.
like it's almost a library, and so I think it really shows, I think, the greatest minds that sometimes really your purpose is truly, really to simply help the world understand an author's work, especially in terms of a work of Thomas Aquinas, right? Which is, I
Yes.
think, probably one of the greatest philosophers, in the
Correct.
past, like 1,000 years or so.
Yes, and that is why I told you that I have a lot of respect for Bishop Bushu. Actually, in spite of the fact that he doesn't, right? I think I see as humility that he just committed himself to explaining, to understanding Thomas Aquinas and explaining it so well to other people. I think it's worthy. It's a worthy task by itself, even though I wrote in my blog I added a comment. I call it now because my the bishop is called Bushu, so I call it the Bushu syndrome, and I call it the Bushu syndrome. That tendency of a student to admire the master so much that they refuse to think outside of the box. They just feel like their job is simply to explain that master. So I call it now the Bushu syndrome based on my teacher, and it's of no disrespect to him. Actually, I have a lot of respect for him, but I also think that it can sometimes be unhelpful. In the sense that you are so odd that you get boxed into this mold, and you simply think that, like he said, like Aquinas, he told me Aquinas said it all. Yeah, I mean, I'm not there, but he said a lot, but I still think that there are other things we can improve. So I'm just a different type of guy. So my humility, unlike my uh, mentor's humility, my humility is in the self-correct. I mean, my submitting myself to being corrected, either by myself or by others. I don't say anything and believe that this is final. I know that I could be wrong. So in that case, that's the way I look at my humility. But I'm not. I mean, I would not simply just sit and say, okay, this philosopher has everything, and I just have to. No, that's just not me.
Yeah, I know it's beautiful. So I think it's really the process, right, that you
Yes,
engage in this lifelong learning that really causes you of 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 just knowing more, but also being and becoming aware of so many things that you don't know. And so ultimately, you never really know more, because the more you know, the more questions you
correct.
find yourself with
Yes,
unanswered. So
yeah.
therefore, it's a continuous process. So I really appreciate that, and I think it's so powerful. I'm also curious what you think about, because that's often what we see, right? That
Hmm.
usually when we are in our 20s, 30s, we might be more liberal, and then the older we get, the more knowledge we acquire a lot of times, which is also to some extent a progression of learning, of knowledge, of experience, right? And ultimately wisdom, we become more conservative. Do you see this also in you to some extent, or
No.
how do you see that playing out in your life?
Yeah, no, he has not. Actually, I've become more liberal because, yeah, I mean, like embracing all these concepts. I think basically I've always been liberal though, but also coming up from a very strong Catholic background probably meant that I was forced to embrace some really conservative points of view. And so, right from my days as a teenager and then into the seminary in my early 20s, I already started questioning some of those conservative views, and so I have become more and more liberal. That's for me. I agree with you that that's what other people. That seems to be the case with many people, but for me, I've become more and more liberal. Another reason that I became even more liberal was that some of the things that I believed in as a young person, I later realized that they do not work in history, in reality. So it just made me to become very tolerant of other views. For example, growing up, statements like the truth will set you free. Uh, that was one of my mantras. The truth will set you free. But today, I would tell you that the truth would get you into trouble. I am not saying that you should not pursue the truth. No, I'm not saying that. But don't have the illusion that truth is going to save you. No. Sometimes you get into trouble because you are telling the truth. And in fact, if you are a real truth teller that goes deep into things, you make people uncomfortable. You challenge so many things, and far from the truth setting you free, the truth is going to get you into trouble. Like my leaving the seminary, I think I championed many positions that I'm still convinced today that they were correct, but they gave me a bad image, not because I was wrong, but because I stood for the truth. Uh, for example, seeing, and I've covered some of those here. For example, like I basically think that that it is unfair for women not to be ordained priests when majority of the Christians are women, and then you deny them, you deny them that part. But also, just beyond the mere equity thing, I've gone and done research, looked at the Bible, and I don't think there's a theologically strong reason for denying women ordination. The same thing now with LGBTQ inclusion. I mean, that is a little more controversial, but I've also made a point that we should include them. For example, it is true, I know even some priests who are uh, who are homosexuals. And how do you get a church that says that a homosexual person can give you a sacrament, but that you who are homosexual cannot receive the sacrament because you are? I don't know if you understand, you follow my reasoning. So yeah, those type of things. So I get into those, and again, I may be wrong, but let's ask those questions. Ask those questions. So I've become more liberal thanks to my philosophy. But I do agree with you that many people become more conservative as they get older. But because of the particular philosophy that I've embraced, has actually pushed me to become more and more liberal. Another point is not in the book, but it's just dawned on me uh, on uh, on uh, on February 14, Valentine's Day. Again, I like the LGBTQ stuff. So I just sat, and I don't know how it came to me, but I just thought, see, like in the Catholic Church, one of the main reasons that they argue against LGBTQ inclusion is that the argument is that that it is not natural, that being LGBTQ is not natural. In fact, they use the term contra naturam, which is contrary to nature. Interestingly, on that day, I had a light bulb moment where it just dawned on me that the church uses the same terminology to describe miracles. St. Thomas Aquinas described miracles as contra naturam. So I wrote something on my blog on that day asking that how can contra naturam be at the same time sinful and virtuous? Because miracles, like if before the church makes you a saint, you have to, before the church makes you a saint, they have to prove that, or pronounce you a saint, they have to prove that there's a miracle attributed to you. And St. Thomas Aquinas, going back to Aquinas, described miracle as contra naturam. So it just dawned on me like, you need to demonstrate that there's something contrary to nature in order to be a saint, yet you are being crucified and told that you are a sinner when you are also described as having tendencies that are contrary to nature. But beyond that too, though, it goes even to the question as what is nature? And do we understand nature completely? Yes, if you are a Thomist and all that, you will say yes, and then you could argue that that therefore what you understand as nature is everything that should be, and therefore that maybe LGBTQ is not being natural. But if you come from my perspective, you see that, and I'm not being subjective here. I mean, if you think that that knowledge is self-correcting, then you may ask yourself in humility, like, do we really know all of nature? And if and how do we define nature? What do we put within the bounds of nature, and or not? So if when you start thinking along those lines, then the whole argument that being LGBTQ is sinful becomes questionable, because the question is, what is nature? And
Of
how
course,
do you? Yeah.
of course, if you argument of in terms of reproduction, then the answer becomes very clear.
Hmm.
So of course it's a very very important topic. I think that
Yep.
you are actually engaging and that you have this really open mind. I think that's
Yes.
really brilliant. And also, by the way, to what sets you free, right? That's also a
Yes.
very good question, because it also depends on what we actually mean, right?
Yep.
And it can, in many ways, it actually can set you free, but in another level, right? From a spiritual perspective, right? In
Yep.
terms of Christ, right? If you
Yes.
really speak always the truth, yes, you will never have an easy life, because the truth will truly set you free. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have any issues. In fact, the Bible usually precisely says the contrary, right? The
Yes.
truth, if you stand up for the truth, it will just, as a consequence, by
Yep.
definition,
Yeah.
you know, set you into big trouble.
Trouble. Yep. Yep. Christ himself being crucified. Yeah.
It's brilliant. I really, really appreciate your work, and I can't really wait to really catch up and to dive deeper into your two incredible books. But I think just that we unpacked a little bit, what actually a lifelong learner is already super important, because you are really the manifestation of a true lifelong learner. And now for the audience, I really want to know, what can people do if let's suppose that they think they are not lifelong learners, they're not like you, but they want to become a lifelong learner. What's your first and most important advice that they can do in order to embark on becoming a lifelong learner?
Yeah, I think today has become very, very easy. Uh, Something as simple as maybe uh, just get on your phone. If somebody tells you something that is new, this thing, get on your phone, go to Google and Google it. But also, of course, look for the right. I mean, there's a whole thing about that, but at least you can look for things like definition of terms and all those type of things. So now my phone and the internet has become really useful to me. And I think even if you don't want to read and get degrees and all that, which is not necessary in many cases, you can simply enlighten yourself. Like somebody calls a new word. Like today we're talking about epistemology. If you've never heard the word, Google it and like see what does it mean, and then maybe read, even if it's a paragraph, stick to the definition. Even just doing that is going to help you, and you see that gradually you would really start understanding things more deeply.
Dr.
Yep.
Asongu, what a pleasure to
Yes.
have you on the show. I can't wait to catch up and to further episode on your incredible work on The Splendor of Truth, published by,
Thank you.
and other works, The Doctrine, and so on. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to other conversations as well.
What a blessing to myself and really to the world. Dr. Januarius Asongu.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.the-ykm.com.